And this is a picture of the woman, a beautiful young girl that never had problems in life, with a magnificent future in this country. And now she's dead.
The lights hum inside a nearly empty train car. Passengers sit quietly, some scrolling on their phones, others staring out at the darkened city. Among them is 23-year-old Iryna Zarutska, a young woman who had escaped the war in Ukraine, building a new life in Charlotte, North Carolina. But what should have been an ordinary evening commute would end in tragedy. Just 4 minutes after the train pulled away from the station, a pocketknife was drawn. 3 sudden strikes. And in an instant, Iryna's life was gone. Investigators later confirmed there was no argument, no exchange of words. In the words of prosecutors, it was an unprovoked attack, no interaction before she was stabbed. How could a life filled with hope end so suddenly, and why did it happen here? Iryna Zarutska, just 23 years old. She was a Ukrainian refugee who fled the war in her homeland, leaving behind everything familiar in search of safety. In Charlotte, North Carolina, she worked, studied English, and began to build the life she had once only dreamed of. But on the night of August 22, 2025, around 10 p.m., that life was cut short. Iryna boarded the Lynx Blue Line at the East/West Boulevard station in the South End neighborhood. Minutes later, she was fatally stabbed. Investigators say the attack was unprovoked, there had been no words exchanged, no confrontation. Just a sudden act of violence that ended her journey. Her story matters because she had already escaped danger once, yet found herself vulnerable in the very place she thought would protect her. Her murder has left Charlotte shaken, forcing questions that go far beyond a single crime. How safe are our public transit systems? Were there failures in security or oversight that night? And how should mental health and the justice system work together to prevent tragedies like this? The motive remains unclear. But the questions her death leaves behind are impossible to ignore. Before the events of that August night, Iryna Zarutska's story was one of resilience. Born and raised in Ukraine, she lived through the uncertainty and fear that came with the Russian invasion in 2022. Like many families, hers faced a difficult decision: stay and risk everything, or leave behind the world they knew in search of safety. Iryna left with her family, arriving in the United States with little more than determination and hope. In Charlotte, she began the slow and difficult process of rebuilding. She worked long hours, often late into the night, while also attending English classes to better adapt to her new home. Her relatives described her as focused and optimistic, eager to build a future after the upheaval of war. Public transit became part of her daily life, an ordinary routine that allowed her to travel between work and home, much like thousands of other residents in the city. The train system she relied on, the Lynx Blue Line, is Charlotte's light rail service. It runs for nearly 20 miles, stretching from the city's southern suburbs through downtown and into the university area. Each day, thousands of passengers step on board. The system was designed to be quick, convenient, and affordable, but security on the line has long been a subject of debate. At the time of Iryna's death, there were limited patrols, minimal staffing, and questions about how well the system was being monitored. City officials would later acknowledge that these concerns were not new. The South End neighborhood, where Iryna boarded the train that night, is one of Charlotte's busiest and fastest-growing areas, a mix of restaurants, apartments, and nightlife. The East/West Boulevard station, brightly lit but open to the street, was familiar to many commuters. For Iryna, it was just another stop on the path home. But she wasn't alone on that train. Just a few seats behind her was a 28-year-old man named DeCarlos Brown Jr. Court records show he had been arrested several times in the past on charges ranging from trespassing to assault. His family and attorneys have also confirmed he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, a serious mental health condition. At the time of the attack, he had been released from custody only weeks earlier. Whether the system had done enough to monitor his condition or provide treatment remains a matter of public concern. On the night of August 22, Iryna finished her shift at work and made her way to the Blue Line. Surveillance footage later showed her sitting in an aisle seat, quiet and unaware, with Brown positioned directly behind her. Investigators confirmed that in those early minutes, there was no conversation between them, no sign of conflict. Two strangers on the same train, their paths crossing by chance. The train pulled out of East/West Boulevard station just after 10 p.m. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Passengers sat scattered across the car, some scrolling their phones, others looking out at the passing lights of South End. Iryna sat quietly in her aisle seat, unaware of the danger behind her. About 4 minutes into the ride, surveillance footage shows the man seated behind her make a sudden movement. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a folding knife, and snaps the blade open. Without warning, he rises to his feet. What happens next is as quick as it is brutal. Investigators later testified that he struck Iryna 3 times, one wound to her neck, others to her body. There was no exchange of words. No chance for her to react. The car erupted in chaos. Witnesses described screams, the sound of feet shuffling, and passengers scrambling toward the doors, desperate to escape. Some froze in shock. Others ran to the far end of the train, calling for help. Iryna collapsed in the aisle, bleeding heavily. Within moments, passengers attempted to intervene, shouting at the attacker, trying to alert the conductor. The train came to a halt, but by then, the damage had been done. Paramedics would arrive quickly. But despite their efforts, Iryna Zarutska was pronounced dead at the scene, her life ending in the very place she had relied on for her daily safety. The suspect, DeCarlos Brown Jr., exited the train onto the platform. Officers were already closing in. According to police reports, he was arrested without further violence just steps away from where the attack occurred. In the hours that followed, investigators pieced together the final moments from passenger statements and security video. Witnesses later told officials they had seen no warning signs, no argument, no interaction between attacker and victim before the stabbing. One writer described it simply as sudden, shocking, and unprovoked. For Iryna's family, the nightmare was almost impossible to comprehend. Her uncle, speaking through tears, recalled how she had left Ukraine to escape violence, only to face it again, thousands of miles from home. The pain in his words reflected not just grief but disbelief. The aftermath left the city shaken. A routine evening commute had turned into a crime scene. And Charlotte residents were left to ask, how could something like this happen in a public space meant to be safe for everyone? Within minutes of the attack, Charlotte-Mecklenburg police sealed off the station. The platform became both a crime scene and the center of a frantic investigation. Federal authorities were quickly brought in, given that the attack occurred on a public transportation system. The charges came swiftly. At the state level, prosecutors filed for first-degree murder. At the federal level, the suspect faced a charge rarely used, causing death on a mass transportation system, a crime that can carry the death penalty. Investigators gathered evidence piece by piece. Surveillance cameras on board captured the stabbing from multiple angles. Passengers gave statements, many still trembling as they described what they had seen. Court affidavits laid out the timeline in stark, clinical detail, no words exchanged, no confrontation, just an unprovoked act of violence. Attention also turned to the suspect's history. Records showed prior arrests. His family, in later interviews, spoke of his long struggle with mental illness. Court filings confirmed he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. In statements to authorities, he mentioned paranoid thoughts and troubling beliefs, but investigators stressed that these were unverified claims, not a proven motive. For Iryna's family, the news offered no comfort. They described her as a hardworking young woman who had overcome war and displacement, only to have her life cut short in what they called a senseless act. Through their grief, they began calling for stronger security measures on the city's trains and buses, hoping no one else would endure what they had. City officials moved quickly to address the outcry. Charlotte's transit system, known as CATS, announced plans to increase patrols, add more security officers, and reintroduce fare inspectors who had been absent during the pandemic. Local leaders promised that lessons would be learned, though many residents questioned why those changes had not been in place already. The case drew national attention. News outlets across the country carried Iryna's story, framing it as both a tragedy of violence and a failure of safety systems. Commentators debated what this meant for public transportation, for mental health treatment, and for the responsibilities of local government. At candlelight vigils, community members spoke less about politics and more about a life lost too soon. By the end of the first week, one thing was clear. This was no longer just a Charlotte story. It had become part of a broader conversation, about safety, about accountability, and about how to protect those who rely on public spaces every single day. Today, DeCarlos Brown Jr. stands charged with first-degree murder in North Carolina and under federal indictment for causing death on a mass transit system. Prosecutors have confirmed the case could carry the death penalty, or result in life imprisonment. His mental health history will likely play a central role in how the courts proceed. Investigators say their work is ongoing. Both local police and the Department of Justice continue to review evidence, while Iryna's family and community leaders push for broader reforms, more transit security, stronger oversight of mental health treatment, and changes within the justice system itself. But key questions remain. What truly motivated the attack? Will riders ever feel safe again on Charlotte's trains? And how can a community, already shaken, begin to heal from a loss so sudden and profound? Iryna Zarutska was just 23. She had fled war, carried hopes for safety, and worked each day to build a future. Her life was not defined by the violence that ended it, but by the courage it took to start again in a new country. And yet, her loss has left a wound that stretches far beyond her family. Her story now forces us to ask difficult questions, about justice, about mental health, and about whether our public spaces are truly safe. She came to escape war. She came to build a life. Yet in a single act of violence, so many systems, justice, mental health, public safety, were forced to face their test. Will we be different now? What do you believe should change in public transit security? And how should mental illness be addressed within our legal system? I invite you to share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share. Not just for awareness, but so Iryna's name is not forgotten, and so that, perhaps, change can follow.